After the tune, an interview with conservationist, author, and founder of the Orangutan Project, Leif Cocks.
Evolution.
Communication.
Cognition.
Conservation.
Behavior.
Primatology.
Typically primates.
Become the monkey.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another installment of the PrimateCast. I'm your host, Andrew McIntosh of Kyoto University's Wildlife Research Center, and the podcast is brought to you by the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology at Kyoto University's Center for the Evolutionary Origins of Human Behavior. In this episode, I share my conversation with conservationist, author, and founder of the Orangutan Project, Leif Cocks. Thanks also to Audrey Love for the suggestion and the introductions. So Leif is a tireless conservationist who seems to be involved in innumerable conservation projects throughout Southeast Asia, but most notably, the Orangutan Project, which he founded in 1998. We talk about Leif's path to conservation, which began early on with an interest in animals and nature and was formalized through his experiences in higher education and his work in husbandry and small population biology at Perth Zoo. What really stands out in this conversation is Leif's passion for and commitment to being a defender of the natural world and all the living beings in it. We get into orangutan conservation, including what he views as the pillars of successful orangutan reintroduction: physical health, mental health, social skills, and forest skills. Leif describes how the Orangutan Project operates, emphasizing the importance of collective action and going far beyond just orangutan conservation, right into the preservation of entire ecosystems and supporting local human communities living therein. He also deftly describes the real challenges involved in conserving the rainforest megafauna, from supporting the endearingly quote-unquote batshit crazy folks who manage to translocate elephants to safe areas, to getting people emotionally connected to the species and ecosystems that need saving. You might also notice how quotable he is. I really appreciated Leif's ability to unpack the nitty-gritty of running a successful conservation effort and the efforts they've made to assess the progress of the various initiatives they've sponsored. We close out the conversation with some moral questions about personhood in non-humans and the value of captivity for conservation at places like zoos. If you want to find out more about Leif, his personal story, and his work, you can find him at leifcocks.org or through the Orangutan Project website. He's also the author of 3 books: Orangutans and Their Battle for Survival, Orangutans, My Cousins, My Friends, and Finding Our Humanity. And you can also check out episode number 14 in season 1 of the Talking Apes podcast. With all that said, here's my conversation with Leif Cocks. Thinking about your kind of path to becoming a conservationist, what did that look like? So how did you kind of first get interested in the study or protection of animals?
Yeah, now I've already had a strong interest of working with, or more importantly, for animals. So from even an early childhood. And so naturally, I, went on to university and, got my zoology, biology degree. And then I started working at a zoo and had the opportunity to work with 15 orangutans. And discovered that they're self-aware persons that don't belong in captivity. And, and in many ways, a far more noble form of humanity than human beings. And of course, very quickly discovered that they were being driven to extinction in the most horrific ways that we can imagine. And so my postgraduate research has been in primate behavior, and then my master's on orangutans. And then, of course, my spare time was, going into their forest, learning about them, rescuing them. And then over time, my out of work with helping orangutan conserving their forest became my full-time job, and working with and trying to increase the welfare of orangutans in captivity became a small proportion of my work, because obviously culminating in the end of my career is starting to bring some of the orangutans that I could from the zoo back to the wild and reintroducing them back into a ecosystem that we had already been funding the protection of.
That last point, it's something I definitely want to come back to as well. I think it's a pretty rare case still of zoo. So this was a zoo house orangutan that was eventually reintroduced into the. Was that specific orangutan born in the wild?
Well, three ultimately came from the zoo back to the wild. No, the zoo born.
Zoo born.
In fact, the first zoo-born orangutan going back to the wild was Tamara, and her grandmother, Puan, was wild-born. And so she was basically the second generation of zoo-born orangutans that eventually then had the opportunity to go back to the wild.
It's incredible to think about. I mean, now when you hear a lot about reintroduction or introduction projects, it's pretty hard to find the right set of circumstances that allow kind of success for that to happen. And one of them, though, is pretty clear, is that if animals were born in the wild and then later brought into a kind of artificial setting, it's a little easier to reintroduce them. So
it's kind of a little bit of a misnomer depending on what animal you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, let's go to the full end of the spectrum. If you want to reintroduce a cat, you don't have to do too much. They're like 90% instinct, 10% learn. That's why cats just go feral everywhere around the world. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be an expert. Your average house owner who lets a cat have a reintroduction project that's going to be fairly successful. And then when we're talking about, let's say, on the other end of the spectrum, intelligent animals that adapt primarily to the environment through culture, not by natural selection. So they have long maternal periods, few offspring, and vacant brains, very little instinct, as programmed through culture. Yeah. So, if let's say an orangutan is born in the wild, and 6 months of age, the mother was killed and eaten and is taken off to ride a bicycle around the stage in Thailand, and then eventually gets rescued and come back. Is that more adapted or to the environment than, let's say, an orangutan that was born in captivity, natural raised, and had all the mental health and support from its mother, which is critically important, mental health. Mm-hmm. And then, and it's been, given all the training and support to learn about trees, learn about foraging and that sort of stuff. Is one candidate more likely to survive than the other? I'll suggest that just simply being wild born, although that certainly can be a factor. But, it's not necessarily the only, the be or end all. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about intelligent animals that adapt to the environment through culture, not natural selection, it's not the be or end all of reintroduction.
So when you mentioned there were 3 then that you were involved with that were eventually reintroduced, and what were then the kinds of things that at the time in the zoo you and others working on that project were trying to make sure happened for those orangutan, for their release or reintroduction to eventually be successful? You mentioned being raised obviously naturally by a mother is an important part of that, but what other things were? Yeah,
I think that there's actually 4 pillars, or foundations, maybe a better way of visualizing of orangutan conduction. First is physical health. So if the orangutan has got one arm missing and is sick or contains some communicable disease, it's not suitable for reintroduction, for its survival and survival of others. The next building block is mental health. Orangutans which have their mothers killed in front of them, eaten and traumatized and tortured, their little brains are destroyed. And we know as humans, mental health is necessary for success. And so their little minds have to be repaired. So in the case of, let's say, Tamara, the first zoo-born orangutan, she was mother raised, suckled, and then at the natural age of dispersion, she went on a journey. So mentally prepared, emotionally prepared. The third building block is social skills and social health. Can you interact and know how to interact with other orangutans properly, get along, learn from them, get cultural cues and information? And that's also extremely important. And so Tamara already had the first 3 building blocks. Now, the most key thing that she didn't have is forest skills, the last platform of orangutan reintroduction. So before she even left the zoo, we enclosed this huge fig tree, and fig trees are the number one important tree important for orangutan survival because they're all year round food source. And so the density of fig trees is directly related to the density that orangutan population can be at. So she lived in the fig tree, and we fed her in the fig tree. And we started speaking to her Indonesian and all the things that we started to do, so the transition was even starting there. And then when she went to Bukit-Tigapulu, where she was part of a program to re-establish the population there when it stinks in the 1830s, we kept her in a cage in the jungle for 2 weeks. And so she can get acclimatized to all the sounds and see everything go around. But what we did also, we went out every day and collected all the different food sources that she could find in the forest. So she was already eating the forest fruits before she came out, and then she'd already been living in the tree. So first day she was out, she'd make the night nests at night and she started foraging for food. Obviously, there were 3 years of following her and helping her transition and supporting her with food when she couldn't find enough, until she became qualified to be independent. But so it was in a sense a long journey. With some orangutans that we even, for example, the ex-pets we're finding are too damaged to really have the ability to survive in the wild. But even then, we're actually, at the moment, we're designing and building in Sumatra an open enclosure for these orangutans to live in the rainforest, but we feed and support them, and their offspring will then become wild. And so they get the best welfare outcome, and also their genes are not lost to the conservation of the species. So I guess maybe I'm just highlighting that last bit because just to highlight, it's a long-term process. Reintroduction, as I said, things like cats aside, if not release the cage you see in the documentaries and the animal runs off, that is just the tip of the iceberg. You got to protect the area, you got to secure the area, you got to make sure the animal's prepared, and most likely with animals such as orangutans, you got to provide long-term ongoing support to transition them to the being independent in the wild.
One of my colleagues, formerly of Kyoto University, now at Kyoto City Zoo, Yumi Yamanashi, conducted a study of bed building by chimpanzees in captivity. This was I believe, at Kyoto City Zoo, and found that some of the older chimpanzees had been originally came from the wild or had mothers that were in the wild. And these chimpanzees, even later in their age, later in their life, are building beds. So as chimpanzees do. But some of the kind of chimpanzees that were born in captivity and don't have any experience with a mother who raised them and had also come from captivity or had a mother that was in captivity. So you see the cultural transmission of these behaviors or the memories of the chimpanzees that came from the wild that have them. And I was just wondering, in that context, like bed building is something that's quite important for chimpanzees in the wild in order to satisfy their kind of naturalistic behaviors. But what are maybe some examples of things that you look for in the orangutans in the, say, pre-release phase, like the things that maybe that looks like they're pretty ready and things that maybe they need to pick up still? And then how might you build a program to teach them those things?
Yeah, no, it's all very interesting, and there's lots of factors into play. First thing is to say, culture is just not this standalone thing. That culture is how we adapt to the environment, both humans and animals, people. And if you try to solidify a culture, it becomes maladjusted. So people want to hold culture at some time in the past. Let's say if you're conservative, you want things back in the 1950s, but it's a different world, and so your culture becomes dysfunctional. And you long for the 1950s where your culture, that you're stuck in was actually functional, and so similarly, let's just say chimpanzees in captivity, there's no use doing those bed nests. It has no cultural relevance, and culture that doesn't have relevance to the environment must be dropped, and new cultures must be taken up. However, we don't have unlimited plasticity in cultural development, if that makes sense. And also our brains are certainly, especially in the early years, are formed in ways that meet the cultural requirements, if that makes sense. So you can, if you, for example, we could reintroduce Tamara and the other orangutans back to the wild because we had orangutans living in a natural social system with ergonomically designed enclosures and that sort of stuff. But an orangutan came from another zoo, which was so far away, too far away from the wild environment. That was not possible because even their brains, so that makes sense, is triggered and developed to survive in a cage in captivity. So we see that with humans. Humans often, if they're living in a very high stress environment when they're young, they have epigenetic triggers in their brain which makes them nervous and and frightened and that goes on for a lifetime because it's a great adaptation if you're living in a very stressful, dangerous environment. But then once that danger is removed, you're stuck in that environment. So I guess what I'm saying is, there's a whole host of things that need to be applied. But with orangutans, one of the things that certainly I've discovered and I found quite surprising is, they're just damn smart, and they just figure things out. It's like, Tamara made a nest the first night. Everyone said, she can never make a nest. Well, she's smart, and she's got 4 hands, and she's seen other orangutans, just those 2 orangutans make nests. It wasn't like, my God, took her 10 years to learn, how to do that. You got 4 hands, you're in a tree, and you've seen someone else do it once. There, I want to go to sleep on a nice mattress, And one of the things, and we've seen it with many other reintroduced orangutans. Sometimes you go, no one's taught them that. They haven't learned enough. Anybody, how could they? But they just figure it out. And one of the things I always say, what's so remarkable about orangutan, and this is different to chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are more like me, I guess. You give me some sort of electronic thing, I just keep pressing the buttons, until something works, but orangutans are the ones that actually read the user manual. And so often orangutans have been perceived as less smart because they just sit there and run their computer simulations and cerebral cortex, don't do anything, and then act once and do it. Extremely good at figuring things out and taking the time to do that. So that's one of the, at least from my perspective, one of the most remarkable things I've seen in orangutans in the reintroduction project.
I've communicated with a number of people who work with orangutans, whether it's in cognitive studies or within zoos, and they pretty much everyone says the same thing, that they're very deliberating animals that can definitely surprise you almost endlessly with what they're capable of.
Oh yeah, they're incredibly smart. And of course, to be smart and have a big brain to be smart for no reason is very stupid, because you have this high calorie consuming organ, and if it's not contributing to survival, it's not an asset at all. It's a liability. So all animals, including us, are intelligent in ways which suit our survival and reproduction. And so this is why I would say orangutans are dunces in the classroom, but geniuses in the rainforest. And from an orangutan perspective, we're idiots. I'm sure they look at us and go, why don't you have that temporal spatial map immediately where every bit of food in the over time and space is kept? Because you're an idiot. They can't understand why we're so stupid, because they're intelligent in their way, but we are arrogant, and we always compare both. And this is culturally between humans as well. We compare by our own standards. And so, orangutans are very much, the geniuses of the rainforest. So we should never underestimate them, in their ability to learn, thrive, and survive.
So before getting into then the Orangutan Project and all the conservation work that you've been doing, just to come back to something I pinned earlier, which was the transition from working in zoos, doing graduate studies. Where was it that you first worked in the zoo?
In Perth, Western Australia.
I was in Perth. Yeah. And then, so what was the transition then from working in a zoo setting to, did you go from there to doing graduate study, or was it the other way around?
No, I mean, I already had a degree in zoology, biology, from university. But, my postgraduate research in orangutans and other primates just, happened while I was working with them. So I didn't have an ambition to get a postgraduate diploma or get a master's. Those are vehicles I use to discover, find out information I needed to help those animals. So it wasn't, like this parallel thing that had no relationship with it. And also starting the Orangutan Project in 1998. I decided to start a conservation organization. It was about solving solving a problem of orangutan survival as a species, but also then dovetailed in my ambition of the orangutans are actually looking after going back to the wild. And first of all, we had to support wildlife protection units. We had to support an orangutan reintroduction site, right? And so these things all had to happen, which wasn't going to be funded by a zoo, to allow the welfare of those orangutans to also be included. So it's always been a holistic approach. Then included, and then the orangutans are directly looking after.
So the Orangutan Project, so 1998, you say, so it's getting on there in terms of years, and still looks like it's going quite strong. But in the beginning, you said it was just something that had to happen in order to do the things that you were working on. But I think it also takes a kind of person to make something like that happen. So how was it from your perspective setting up this conservation? I mean, it's ultimately a conservation organization, but was it something that you spent, obviously you must have spent a lot of time building, but what was the process like from you were at the zoo and building this conservation project?
I mean, I guess there's certain aspects to it. One is you don't work if you're doing what you love and what you believe in. So, that's a certain aspect. So how do you get the energy in well, it's what I believe in. It's what I love to do, to help others and make this happen. The second thing is, as human beings, I firmly believe as individuals, we're pretty useless. That's why, British Petroleum developed the carbon footprint. One of the 100 companies destroying the planet, they give 90% of climate change. Why they develop carbon footprint? Because they want you to take in you're the problem. You go home and work out your carbon credit and do your little thing while we make a lot of money, destroying the rest of the planet. And so, those destroying the planet and those who want to save it and save the rainforest and save orangutans also have to understand is, as individuals, we're pretty much powerless. And so, my skill is in collectivization, bringing other people together, supporting other people, and collectivizing together. And that's kind of been how I've always worked. From when I was a zookeeper, I was a shop steward. When I was a curator, I was on the species management program committee. So I've always been a very firm believer of collectivization to achieve things. And so 1998 I collectivized people that would help with different skills, and then we moved and we grow from there.
So at the moment, what was the specific problems you were hoping to solve when you started the Orangutan Project? So you mentioned a site for reintroductions. What was the actual context there?
Well, it's all kind of inclusive. Now, the first thing is to say from a strategic perspective is orangutans may be the center of my love, but not the boundary of. And I don't believe we can create a better world, even for orangutans, without considering all other living beings and providing a win-win solution for all the living beings. That's all the other biodiversity, the tigers, the elephants, those projects were created as well because they were falling outside the umbrella of orangutan conservation. And we've got Forest for People, looking after people, developing agricultural systems for them to prosper under the rainforest canopy. And, saving rainforest is one of the most strategic things and cost-effective things we can do to help save the planet, mitigate climate change. and help the long-term economy of Indonesia as a country.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all win-win solutions. Does that make sense? So it's always been, the vision has always been holistic. Does that make sense? Do what you're good at and do where your skills are at, but hold the holistic vision of something that's benefit to all living beings. How that manifests as a particular strategy is our strategy to save up to 8 ecosystems of right type, shape, and size of rainforests, that all the different species, subspecies of orangutans can survive the extinction crisis. So it has to be the right type, shape, and size. Otherwise, the rainforest itself is not sustainable or collapsing on itself. And certainly the populations of orangutans it can hold are unsustainable, collapsing itself. Of course, the two animals which are falling outside of that umbrella were the tigers and elephants, because even if we save all the remaining ecosystems, there's no sustainable population of tigers in our future. There's no sustainable population of smart-twin elephants. They have to be secured in small numbers in the ecosystem and then managed over generations by transferring genes, and in particular males, between the populations. And that's, of course, is because my last job at the zoo is, as a small population biologist, managing small zoo populations and genetics. And so that's where, again, it dovetails in the sense of, unfortunately, some species are going to have to be actively managed, for several generations until, hopefully sometime in the future we start rewilding the planet to become more sustainable. But in the meantime, while we're managing that, we do have the opportunity to save the last viable ecosystems for orangutans and rainforests in the next 10 years, and which I call the most important 10 years in human history, because it's intrinsically linked to climate change, because destruction of rainforests causes climate change. But the feedback loop is climate change is causing droughts, rising temperatures, less productivity, in the rainforest, causing sea levels to rise to inundate lowland coastal peat swamps, which is prime orangutan habitat. So these things are all interlinked. So we not only have to save orangutans and rainforests, and that helps climate change and the long-term viability of Indonesia as an economic system, but we also need the whole world to get on board and save the planet. And so the planet's not providing this massive feedback loop, which will destroy everything that we're wishing to create.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's quite the quagmire of issues to kind of unpack for people. But you mentioned umbrellas. So orangutans, I wanted to ask this question of you. So in conservation, obviously there are a few key concepts, like umbrella species being one of them, where if you kind of target one species, and its protection, then obviously you can protect any species that fall within, for example, the habitat it lives in. Then there's also other concepts like flagship species, and I think orangutan qualifies as a flagship species as well, as something we can all get behind. It's a charismatic animal. So you prefaced that by saying it's not only about orangutans, but obviously you have a passion for orangutans, and they're incredible animals. But what do you see as like the major, in terms of orangutans as umbrellas and perhaps as flagship species as well, what are kind of the advantages of focusing on orangutans?
Well, because orangutans are a large-bodied, large-brained animal and are widely distributed in the rainforest, living semi-solitary lifestyles, you have to have very large areas to support them. But let's say you've got monkeys and gibbons and squirrels. If you can save a viable population of orangutan, there is a viable population of them, because they live in such greater numbers, because of their small size within the rainforest. And so you don't have to, in a sense, worry too much about them, because they'll come along for a free ride. If you're protecting the habitat and the viable ecosystem, they're going to be okay. It's a megafauna which you're going to go first. And of course, as I described, is unfortunately today and foreseeable future, with animals which even need even greater area, and the two ones we can highlight are tigers and elephants, it's already too late for them to have viable populations in one area. But we do have a plan, and we're doing it now, where we're saving herds of 120, 150 elephants in these ecosystems. And when the males disperse and they leave, trying to find the next herd, they get killed, as agricultural pest or for the tusks. What we're doing is, we're employing people to put them on trucks and drive them to the next ecosystem. So I call it's a cross between Tinder and Uber, but for elephants, to make sure they're safe and they get to the next ecosystem. And this has been done successfully.
Really?
We know the system.
Yeah.
The system works.
How many people do you need to employ in order to move a single elephant, for example?
Or a dozen at least. And they all have to be batshit crazy, because they're big, dangerous animals, trying to get it on the truck, So, I'm being a bit flippant there, but
of course.
But the real term, of course, is brave, and knowledgeable and know what they're doing. And luckily, we do in our network, have vets and rangers who and our field manager Alex Mokenbecker, the international ranking field manager, with immense experience, and so with everything, because we've got the plan, and within our network of collectivization of people, we have the skills. Unfortunately, at the moment, what's the rate determining step which is holding us back is funding, having enough money to be able to achieve the vision in time.
So if I look on the website of the Orangutan Project, I pulled up an infographic that people listening won't be able to see, but I think it was focusing on maybe the kind of successes that you've had over the years. And one thing it also includes is different kinds of areas of conservation that you're working on. So you have forest protection, then you have the release projects and monitoring, and you have also rescue, rehabilitation, and release, and you have outreach as well to educate and empower people for conservation and wildlife. So maybe if you could just summarize like the kind of structure of the Orangutan Project and how you kind of engage in all of those different activities. Collectivizing seems to be a key term here.
No, exactly. And it's also very efficient, collectivize. If you want to, start your own organization, compete against the other guys, and, this guy's, I don't want this guy to be Mr. I want to be Mr. Orangutan, so this is how it goes, And so, most of the energy is, and emotional energy is going into fighting the other organizations and people, that's human nature. And so what we want to do is go beyond human nature to a loving kindness and intelligent action beyond that. So we cooperate and we work with all others. The first thing is to say, why that's on a website is because that's what I care about. And we are what you measure. Doesn't make sense. I don't care how much money we raise and how much publicity we get and that sort of stuff. I care about how many orangutans we're saved, how much forest we're protecting, how many elephants we're protecting. Those are the things that really matter. And those are the things I want to measure to understand our progress. Now, we have a range of activities to do them. But I'm not going to, in a sense, purport which activity is good or bad or better or worse, because that will give you the misunderstanding information. And this is why a lot of money is wasted. Like we get a lot, for example, if the trend is plant a tree, and you get inundated by people who want to plant a tree, and you go, well, actually, I don't need that. And actually, sometimes it's not very efficient, and it's not the right thing. And planting a tree is just one small part of a whole step. And so I always say, for every complex problem in the world, there's a simple solution, which is absolutely wrong. It's great for getting elected, build a wall or Brexit or something, but it's really bad for, achieving good in the world. So what we do, we look at every ecosystem we're working at, and we diagnose the disease, and then we put the right medicine in the right dosage. Some that is land acquisition, leasing or land purchase. Some that is rangers going on. And some that, for example, the population of orangutan is extinct, so we need to reintroduce that population, so reintroduction to it. Sometimes it's reforestation. Most of the time, it also involves some community work, working with the local community to make sure they're prosperous and happy and are connected to the rainforest. And so which action we do and to what level depends on the disease of the patient, of the patient of the ecosystem. And so that graph gives people a general idea of where money is to go. But it's not until we actually focus on an individual ecosystem that we can really determine what is the right percentage of expenditure for the right activity.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned like maybe one popular thing for potential donors or funders would be really interested in is planting trees, which may or may not be the appropriate course of action. But how do you then decide at any given moment, which is going to be the focus, or if you have potential donors that are really interested in one thing, but maybe you don't think that's the way forward at the moment, like how do you manage those kind of interactions with people and kind of help them, form the better expectations or, more appropriate ones?
Yeah, I guess there's two aspects of fundraising. It's one is a small, large number of fundraising. So you have a large number of small donors, who they can't save the world, but they can contribute something to the project. And that's really about just connecting to them, which something which connects to their heart, And so, and in fact, actually, the more you talk about the stuff we're talking about, the more you turn them off. You get the brain working, and the endorphins go away, and I'll go sit down, right? It's about connecting. This is a beautiful little orangutan. It deserves to live in the wild. It's a sentient person like you. Can you give to help it? And whether your money may just achieve only that, but that's worth a lifetime of work. That little orangutan can live its entire life and free, and that's really the message. Now, the other side of it too is, some donors, they have the potential in some way to save a whole ecosystem, and so my job then is to take them on that journey, because most charity money, at least from my perspective, is wasted. You might as well just flush it down the toilet, and you're probably aware of, all aware of plenty of examples of that. Indiscriminate charity causes more problems than it's solving. And so, but of course, if you don't have a knowledge in the area, you don't know as a major donor. You don't know. Well, seems good. It seems like a good idea. Well, the brochure looks fantastic. So my job is, as a communicator, is communicate and take them on that journey, which often involves, taking people on eco-tours and then taking the major donors to the project and seeing for the real life, and they're getting the feedback of genuine on-the-ground outcomes. And so, and that's a highly, much more detailed level of communication, because I can take them on the journey from confusion, overload with information, to hope, and vision about what can be achieved. And unfortunately, that can't be done in mass media. Unless I have the time, like I do with you today, just sit for an hour and talk about it. Normally, it's just going to be the punchline, to get connection.
I really wanted to ask you about the guiding and the ecotourism. Obviously, ecotourism is become a huge part of what a lot of people push for conservation. But the guiding part, I don't know if too many people. I know one of my colleagues has taken some folks from the public to Africa to their study site, and whether it's in Uganda or the DR Congo. But how did you start guiding and having, and actually on the website, if anyone's interested, I mean, you can be hired.
I'm not hired. You can certainly come on one of my eco tours.
Okay.
But yeah. Well, what I mean, not hired. If you've got $1 million to save the whole ecosystem, yeah. Will I prosecute myself? Well, it's really just a matter of price. How big an ecosystem are you willing to save? But no, jokes aside, ecotourism is part of it, but I don't see it as the savior that often people think it is. The reason is mass ecotourism, which you can make a lot of money from, normally destroys the environment from which it's operating on. We've seen so many cases of that in Indonesia and Malaysia as just two examples. Boutique small ecotourism, which you've done ecologically sensitive, yes, it does work, and it can work, but it's not going to generate income to support the community and save the environment. It's just probably a small proportion. Now, then of course the question is, well, why do I do it? One is my system is the ecotour company pays for my airfare and my accommodation. So I do an ecotour, and then suddenly I'm in Indonesia doing all my meetings and doing all my project reporting and reviews and inspections. And it's all free. I said, hey, from a charity, free is, what we're after. The second thing is each donor, let's say in these normal ecotours, donates $1,000 to be on the tour, to have me come along and give them the tour. So 10 people, that's $10,000 that we didn't have to save conservation. Hey, that's worth a week.
Yeah.
And lastly is, they get to enjoy, me giving talks every night, by the campfire in the rainforest. And a few of them end up to be major donors, because they've genuinely connected with the project, the animals and the people, seen the real work, seen the real people on the ground.
Yeah.
And they go on to make really significant outcomes in the future for conservation. So like everything is like an ecosystem of strategy to save money and ultimately save the forest. But the actual ecotour itself, it's only a small part of the strategy.
Yeah, but it's so important for the idea of connecting people with what you're maybe using as the device for trying to get the donations. And I wonder if, oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is important, because I remember talking to a fundraiser for a major hospital in America, and he said, to the last person, Leif, he said, everyone who donates to this hospital is saying, my mother got this disease, my daughter, my sister. It's some personal connection. Unless it's affected them personally, they don't care. But luckily, people are personally affected by the disease this hospital treats, and therefore they're willing to give money. Problem I have is I'm trying to help indigenous communities in Indonesia that no one's even heard of and no one has connection to. I'm trying to, save elephants and tigers and orangutans that people really haven't had a connection to, and therefore, how do I inspire them? It's so important for their survival, because the money is in the West, right? And this is probably, in true over a larger scale. The money is concentrated in one area, but the low-hanging fruit and the ability to make real meaningful change is in poor developed countries. And so connecting those two is a challenge that, for example, the hospital's fundraiser doesn't have. And so therefore, ecotourism becomes an important tool in my toolbox as a way of connecting people to the cause.
So where I was going to go with that question too, and your introduction is perfect, is maybe I wanted to ask a kind of trivial question, which is what people kind of get wrong about orangutans before they go with you on these eco tours, and in what ways they kind of have a changed kind of perspective. But maybe based on what you just introduced, you could follow that up by answering also what are your major activities then through the Orangutan Project for supporting the local communities as well? So, I mean, obviously by protecting habitat, then you protect a lot of the services that people are using, but is there other ways too that you're trying to make it win-win, not just for the wildlife, but also for the people?
It always has to be win-win. Yeah. If you're doing a win-lose situation, you're part of the problem. It's always win-win.
Yeah.
And it's not wildlife versus people, it's not environment versus economy, it's about win-win solutions. Those are false paradigms. I'll answer the first question first. Is what most people get wrong is how magnificent they are. Because an orangutan, which is adapted to the environment over millions of years, are intelligent in the body, seen in the zoo is an ugly caricature of the magnificence they are. And when you see them in the wild, they, finally go, oh, wow, that's impressive. It's not something I was laughing at, putting a sack on his head at the zoo. The answer to your second question, yes, we care about people. It's not like, because, because the people who don't like what we're doing because we're affecting their business plan, say, they care about animals more than people, they're kind of this peculiar odd person, No, not true. We care about people just as much. We care about all living beings. As an example, the Talatmalak community in Bukit Tigapulu, where Tamara, the first orangutan, was introduced, we had paid for a midwife right, to live there. And we are feeding the school children every day, 2 meals a day, and we're educating them and providing money for not only their primary school education, but scholarships for high school and university. As an example. Now, the Talatmalak community didn't name their children to 6 years old before we started this because they probably would have died, not worth getting attached to these little suckers. Now they name them at birth. And we're working with them to develop agricultural systems under rainforest canopy that they will prosper. Affluence. I'm not talking about just being poor and surviving. I'm talking about well-educated people, affluence. That's a vision that we have. Now, the problem is, this is the challenge we create. There's actually two Indigenous communities here, the Orang Member, which are hunter-gatherers, and the Talatmalak, which is slash and burn agriculture. Both systems of survival have been sustainable, environmentally sustainable over centuries. But the big multinationals have taken all their land away, just like they've taken land from the orangutans, elephants, and tigers. So their systems of survival no longer are sustainable, and the children are becoming malnourished because they can't hunt to find enough food. They can't, and they keep doing slash and burn agriculture. They'll destroy the land because they can't regenerate in time. So no fault of their own, we have to try to work with them to develop agricultural systems under rainforest canopy that will allow them to become sustainable again. Now, as I mentioned before, we adapt as people to the environment by culture, and these Indigenous communities have done the same. And if the environment changes and the culture remains the same, the people become maladjusted to the environment. Yeah, and the trouble is, and we see this with Indigenous communities all over the world, including America and Australia. If you change the environment rapidly, the culture becomes dysfunctional, right? And they can't function in a new society, and they can't even function in the old society because the environment for that society, that culture was adapted to, is no longer there. And you see generations of dysfunctionality because they can't culturally adapt quick enough. And people, I guess, trying to do good say, hold on to the culture. Does that make sense? But that's not what culture is. Culture is how we adapt to the environment. It's not some nice thing. Doesn't make sense. And so the challenge is in a way which supports them and empowers people, is to slowly, in a sense, change the economic and environmental system in a sympathetic way and giving them support in that process, so they can come along at a rate that does that make sense? That is palatable. We're not very good at rapid changes as human beings, and so they can once survive and prosper. And so it's certainly not easy. Community work is the hardest. Human beings are the hardest animal to conserve. And the ones causing most of the problem. But we have to do it because we love those people and we care about them. And the world we want to create is where these ecosystems are not only environmentally self-sustainable for future generations, but economically self-sustainable. The Indigenous communities there are prosperous, and there's enough money generated to protection and the infrastructure to look after that ecosystem. So my vision is, when I, finally leave the world and leave these conservation projects behind, they're not only environmentally, but economically self-sustainable. And we can only do that by supporting and caring for the Indigenous communities.
Yeah. So probably I'm a little bit naive. I don't know what the situation is like in Indonesia, but you mentioned it's not just there, but in other parts of the world where Indigenous communities are very much marginalized and have a fair amount of trouble with conflict between the maybe dominating government or industry or whatever. But is it also true then with oil palm would be the leading industry then that causes the most concern for, climate change aside, most concern for orangutans and other animals in the forest. But what is the relationship then between the oil palm industry and these indigenous communities? So is it like, I imagine the wealthy landowners industries come in, maybe take that away from local communities, or is there a lot of, is there also some, what I was trying to get at, is there also some demand from the local communities to be integrated partly into that system for their own economic gain?
Of course, there's pushback, and but if you look at the maps, if you go look at the map of concessions, forest concessions or land concessions given away, you don't see the area. This is their traditional tribal land, and no, it's like, well, if they did that, they could never knock the forest down in the first place, because the forest wasn't empty. The forest hasn't been empty. It's not like no one was living in the forest. So, human beings have been making a living and sustaining themselves in these forests for centuries. And so the only way you can actually, in a sense, divide up the land and give it to big multinationals to, make billions of dollars on short-term profit is to ignore the fact that the indigenous community is there. And of course, they push back as much as they can, but they're powerless. They're not, they don't have the education, the power, and the money to fight back. So they certainly do. And certainly more and more, you're seeing around the world, including Indonesia, more and more recognition of indigenous rights. So there is progress, which doesn't make sense, but it's slow, and it certainly hasn't been there enough in the past to not just eliminate the vast majority of their land. So that they're really kind of, in a sense, I was, the image is that all orangutans, elephants, tigers, and indigenous communities are stuck in a small patch of forest, and then the rest is all gone. And you have these, orangutans, elephants, tigers, and people, in these last pockets of rainforest, working on a way to survive, and of course, in particular, the elephants and people are in a huge conflict with each other, because they're both intelligent persons who are trying to survive in limited resources in the last remaining ecosystem. And the big thing we have to do is deal with and manage, in this case, human-elephant conflict.
So this might take us in a slightly different direction, just to kind of close out the interview here. But I've noticed you a couple of times in this interview refer to orangutans and now most recently elephants as persons, with personhood. And this kind of gets into, I guess, what some people would think of as an interesting kind of philosophical question about the place of non-human species. And something that I'm very interested in, following groups like the Non-Human Rights Project, for example. And I kind of wonder, I assume you do that deliberately. And I'm kind of wondering what the reception is, or when you refer to orangutans or elephants that way, or what you mean. Maybe I should start by asking you, like, what you mean when you refer to them as persons or with personhood.
Yeah, cool. It's very hard for a lot of people to, think about orangutans, elephants as two examples as persons, because they seem to already define a person as a human being, Homo sapien. There's a mental block against that. Just as there was a mental block when the founders of America wrote, "It is self-evident that all men are created equal." Self-evident means they didn't explain it. But it wasn't self-evident that your skin was black, that you were equal. They kept slaves. And it wasn't self-evident that the persons who shared the bed and raised their children were equal, because women didn't get to vote in America till the 1920s. And so we do have these mental cultural blocks over time. My proposition, by any objective standard, orangutans and elephants, just as two examples we're talking about now, the self-aware persons, they have an individual identity of themselves. They project themselves into the past, into the future, have anxieties about the past and worries about the future, and therefore, are and should be categorized as persons with the same rights as humans, although they don't share our species.
Yeah, it's really fascinating with, especially recent cognitive science, the extent to which we were completely wrong in and continue to be wrong in many ways when we figure out ways to actually examine those questions, the capabilities of other species. And I'm certainly definitely behind the process of trying to get people to reconsider our what some might call human exceptionalism, or another one. We recently had Frans de Waal on the podcast, and he talks about anthropodenial. So the idea that we should be more careful about not allowing the possibility that other species have minds that are capable of things like ours, rather than the reverse, which is don't anthropomorphize. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's in general what we, from a real practical perspective, our inability to extend our compassion and love and concern outside of our old traditional tribal circles of nation and race, as two examples, it's going to kill us. We live in an interconnected world now. If we don't care about people in developed countries and what's happening to them, that comes back and bites us with climate change and political unrest and a myriad of other things. One sort of climate change is caused from the maltreatment of animals in the meat industry. Our lack of compassion for other living beings are coming back to kill us. So the future that we have to have, if we're going to survive on the planet, is to have a wider concern, not only for all humanity, but all living creatures on the planet. Without that, we unfortunately have the technology, the ability, and the reach to even destroy our own futures.
So if you're up for it, I just want to ask two more questions. I know we've come to kind of the end of the hour here, and we should probably get wrapping things up. But we've talked in and out about the role of zoos here and your involvement in zoos, in conservation. And I kind of wonder if you could just comment on where you see now zoos kind of succeeding in one of the major missions that they have, which is for conservation, and maybe where you see they need to maybe do a little bit better, because this is obviously another issue that's become almost mainstream in whether zoos are kind of net positive or net negative for conservation and just in general.
Zoos aren't at this stage conservation organizations, because conservation, you measure the outcomes in saving habitat and species in the wild. And you can't say, there's some strategic programs, like the California condor or the West Australian numbat, where you can bring animals in captivity, have a strategic program and reintroduce back to the wild. So there is notable exceptions, where zoos can do genuine conservation work. But by and large, zoo populations of megafauna such as tigers, elephants, and orangutans are all unsustainable. And they can't save themselves, neither them save the wild population. And there's very little evidence that displaying animals in zoos has a direct conservation outcome. I think it's just seems a convenient thing to make that connection, but there's no evidence for it. So even if zoos contribute a little bit to conservation, it's obviously a very inefficient conservation. When you spend millions of dollars in a zoo and a few thousand go to conservation, it's obviously it's not a conservation organization. It's a animal display organization, which may contribute a little bit to conservation. But of course, as I mentioned, there's notable examples. Of course, with intelligent persons such as orangutans and chimpanzees and elephants, there's actually ethical reasons why we don't want to keep them in captivity, because persons don't do well in captivity, just as persons don't do well in refugee camps, despite all the loving care that they get. Persons need to be free and be able to control who, when, and how often they interact with others of the species. Otherwise, they can't have the mental health for prosperity. So when I was at the zoo, I was certainly trying to encourage the zoo as much as I could to evolve from a zoo to a conservation organization. And for example, the strategy was for, let's say, orangutans, was look, some orangutans are, because of their injuries or diseases, can live the best life possible in a really good Western zoo and get all the loving care from expert keepers. But some orangutans in a zoo could live their lives in rainforest sanctuaries, full in rainforest, free, but just have to be supported, allowed to breed naturally, and the offspring become part of a reintroduction program, the ultimate, reintroduction candidates that will help their species. And some of them have the ability to become fully wild and independent and lead the most dignified, fulfilling life on the orangutan. And therefore, the zoo can be a shop front for orangutans, which have been determined because of their physical or mental injuries, have the best possible life to live there. But their job is to be ambassadors and tell the story, of and raise the funds for support the sanctuaries and the wild orangutans to support the species. And then, so in other words, the zoo becomes a genuine shop front for genuine work. And then, of course, my vision was that the staff, if you're looking after the orangutans at the zoo, would also be part of the reintroduction program, would also be part of the sanctuary. And so the people will be actually talking to people who genuinely work in the field, who are genuinely out there making a meaningful change to save the environment and the species. And that becomes the most powerful advocate for visitors and turn zoos into the shop fronts for genuine conservation work, rather than the tenuous explanation for the rationale for survival, which many zoos talk about today.
Yeah. So, okay, last question, and it's, I think, a good follow-up to that is zoos, you mentioned, could be this place that, zoos also think of themselves as places that allow for this meeting of humans and non-humans. And I think I've heard some zoo professionals call this like it's a place where people can get inspired and really be shown a sense of awe at what nature can be like. And you yourself have done, I think, a lot in that regard in trying to connect to people in the general public. You've written a few books about your own stories with orangutans and their conservation. And I kind of wonder if you could maybe close by just talking about how did the ideas for books come out? How did you, maybe this was something that you're natural at, or how did you kind of get the idea that you wanted to be able to communicate with people in that medium as well? And how does that kind of fit into the general roles that you have for yourself in conservation?
Mm-hmm. It's all about communication and connecting with people. So all through my books are basically autobiographical. They're telling the journey that I'm having with orangutans and other species and humanity. But the other thing is it's a win-win situation. The books are written to provide value, and make the person's reading life better, more insightful, and more prosperous. And so there's always a win-win situation in everything which is going to be effective. So I believe people read my books and enjoy it and actually get something genuinely out of it, and then, if they benefit from it and from it, from entertainment level to the knowledge level, then they're more likely to have the compassion and love to give to causes such as, the conservation of orangutans, as an example. So there's always that win-win situation, and so basically the books are written because, I have ideas, that I want to get out there, and connect with people, as well as podcasts, books and lectures and eco tours are ways of doing that. So in many ways far more powerful than a zoo, because the three reasons why I would argue that the zoo is not as powerful as they think with connection is, one is, I mentioned before, orangutans, as an example, ugly caricatures of their magnificence of the environment. So you're not seeing the animals. That's really magnificent. The second one is, kids know more about dinosaurs than any other animal, and they've never seen one.
I have, yes, my kids are no exception.
And people care more probably about saving whales than probably most other species, but they've never seen one in the zoo. I'm not saying someone can't go to the zoo and get a connection, but for the cost of running a zoo and the potential loss of welfare that's given to so many animals in the zoo. And I'm not saying there's some animals that can't be kept adequately in good welfare conditions, but there's certainly a big proportion of their current collections can't. Then the cost benefits simply are there. So I'd rather stick to books, podcasts, and ecotours as a more ethical and effective way of connecting with people.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing. And is there maybe we can just close by, I can ask you to share, like if people want to learn more about the Orangutan Project or other things that you're working on or that you're doing, how can people find you and learn more and hopefully contribute?
Yeah. If you go to the Orangutan Project.org and you see all our projects and how to help, and you can download all our annual reports and impact statements to find out exactly what we're doing, and that's wonderful. If you want to know more about my books and my podcasts and my YouTube talks, you can go to Leif Cocks, all one word, LeifCocks.org, and you can get the links to there. And of course, ultimately, if anyone wants to come on an ecotour and spend a few days in the jungle, I'd love to see you there.
All right. Well, Leif Cocks, thanks so much for joining me on the PrimateCast. It's been a pleasure.
You're most welcome. It's been great. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to the PrimateCast. The podcast is hosted and produced by me, Dr. Andrew McIntosh, Senior Scientist for Wildlife Conservation at the Wilder Institute, Calgary Zoo, formerly Associate Professor of Biological Sciences at Kyoto University. Join me for new episodes as often as I can get them out on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Leave a rating or a review of the show to help other listeners find it. Connect with me through our website, theprimatecast.info, or social media on X, Facebook, or Instagram. Feel free to comment, ask questions, suggest future guests, or share whatever else might be on your mind. If you value the show, consider donating or becoming a member. You can do so by visiting theprimatecast.info and clicking on the big yellow Buy Me a Mic button, which takes you to our campaign page. Or you could click on that little heart icon next to the social media links in your podcast player, or on the text link in the show notes. Your support will help cover production costs and is essential to ensure that I can continue to produce quality informational and inspirational interviews with leading figures in the field long into the future.